Okay, so nothing that any of us say is going to change the things that Daniel and his drones come out with. But I just want to address this whole abduction story that Daniel is pushing. Because, of course, it doesn't matter if myself and Justin from Clutch Them Pearls are saying the same thing in terms of what constitutes an abduction and why it's not likely that these children were abducted. It just seems that Daniel and his followers just keep insisting on bringing it up. So I thought it was about time that I addressed this in a full video as opposed to just discussing it as part of one of my other videos. So I've got a few clips to share with you, and of course I'm going to start with a clip from Daniel's great interview on the Turkey channel where he's saying what he believes in terms of abductions.
But I mean, the narrative's always been targeted at me, right, though, Daniel?
Gotcha.
And you know, I'll stay in the spotlight as long as it takes, because as long as I'm the target, the individuals or groups or whoever has the kids, they're gonna feel more relaxed, and that gives investigators a chance to strike.
Note the lizard tongue straight after he said that, because of course there is nobody that has the kids, and you can see the glee on his face as he's saying it, because he thinks that he's saying something that's really, really convincing, even though it's just a variation on the number of times that Durwood has said pretty much the same thing. Now, if you've got the children, make sure that you don't hurt them, and if you just bring them back, I won't say a word, or whatever Durwood's story was at the time. Because he changed his story there so many times. But, you know, Daniel is outright making allegations here that, yeah, someone's got these children. Now, there has been, and there will still be, people who argue that, well, just because the RCMP say there's no sign of an abduction doesn't mean that there wasn't an abduction. Then you get the arguments also that which Daniel will pose in a moment with, well, you know, they're not calling it abduction because it's someone known to the children. You're getting people basically trying to find some way around the simple truth that the RCMP came out pretty early on in the piece and said there is no sign of an abduction. They've made it pretty clear from day one that they do not believe an abduction occurred. And of course, the supporters of Daniel will be like, well, how can they say there wasn't an abduction if they can't say there's any sign of one? Give the guys some credit, honestly. The fact that this is an active, ongoing investigation tells you that there are many, many investigators on this job. And if you are crazy enough to believe that every single one of those investigators is incompetent, then there's nothing that me or anyone else can say to actually convince you of the truth.
So you believe that the kids are alive?
Yes, 100%. I hope every day. I believe the exact same as RCMP do. They didn't go into the woods.
So I mentioned this the other day in a video. He's trying to be persuasive by saying that, well, his beliefs align with those of the RCMP, that the children did not go into the woods. Ergo, you're supposed to believe that means that they were abducted. Here's the thing though, if the RCMP are still maintaining that there's no sign of an abduction, and on top of that, they're telling Daniel, no, those children did not wander into the woods, they're not on the same page as Daniel. Well, I guess at a deeper level they are, because they know what Daniel knows, I believe. As in, they know who is responsible for what happened to the children. But Daniel is trying to convince people here that they have to believe him here because his belief aligns with that of the RCMP. When in reality, the only way that it would align would be if they have said to him, those children did not wander off into the woods. We know that. And that's what he's saying here. And yes, I mentioned this the other day also, but when asked, do you believe the children are still alive, he says, yes, 100%. And he follows up with, I hope every day. Well, that's far from being 100%, isn't it? That's basically saying, I've not got no idea, but I'm hoping they are. Hoping that the children is still alive is worlds away from being 100% certain that they are.
What do you believe happened?
I don't want to go into any theories. I don't want to point any fingers because I've done that so many times online. So I'm going to refrain from doing it, Daniel.
Okay, deja vu. I know I said this the other day, but he's basically saying, follow my lead. I've already told you what you're meant to believe, and I'm going to infer it and expect you to remember what I've told you before. And again, I believe that Malaya has fired shots at him, and he knows that if he actually makes any direct accusations against her, that's going to affect his future possibilities of seeing his daughter.
Do you think it was an outsider?
No, because on the second day they came out and said this is not an abduction. An abduction means that the individual or parties that took the kids wouldn't be known by the kids. That's what an abduction is. So when the RCMP said it wasn't an abduction, that means the person that has the kids is known by them. And because I was with Malaya for 3 years, I think I may know the person that has the kids, right? Because I was involved in the kid's life and I was involved in Malaya's life.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the guy is such a joke, isn't he? First of all, he's now told us outright that the RCMP don't believe the children wandered into the woods. And he said they also have said it's not an abduction. That leaves one possibility, and that is looking directly at the 3 people or 4 people who were on the property at the time that the children went missing. He has, of course, made up this whole definition of what an abduction is, which is wildly inaccurate. Essentially, he's adopted Durwood's narrative of someone that Malaya knows coming and taking the children because Malaya organised it. It wasn't credible when Durwood said it, and it's so not credible now when Daniel's trying to say it. So let's really dig into all this.
Based on the experts and the review of the facts, the inclement weather, the time frames, and their age, the likelihood that they're alive right now is very low.
And the family has said they believe it's an abduction, or they suspect it's an abduction. Are there now any clues or anything leading you to think that that might be possible?
If we had any information that led that way and we felt that we could provide anything with the public, we would have done that. We would have got that information out. We're working very closely with the family, and we will pursue every avenue. But again, I'm not going to make any specific comments, but anything that would point towards that, we would immediately take steps to address things that need to be addressed.
So he's been quite clear here that no, there is nothing that points them in the direction of an abduction, and that if they had any information that led them in that direction, they would have got that information out there immediately. He's basically saying, you know, we would work on it straight away. You would hear about it straight away. Now, here's the thing. This dingbat story came out 6 weeks into the case. That is in June of this year. We're now 6 months in. If there was any truth in this story of Malaya or someone connected to Malaya having taken the children and hidden them away somewhere, you can bet that by now the RCMP would have retrieved those children. Or at the very least, there would be an Amber Alert, Malaya would be arrested, and we would have a lot of information being given out to the public in order to help find the children. None of those things have happened because the story is just ridiculous.
On Thursday, May 15th, RCMP confirmed again that there's been no evidence to suggest the children were abducted.
And it was yesterday that police said they don't believe these children were abducted. They haven't ruled out that this could be suspicious, the situation. And then that brings us to tomorrow, where we're going to see that search resume.
So even early on, the RCMP drew that line in the sand. They do not believe it was an abduction. They've said that outright to various media outlets. They did say, however, that they have not ruled out criminality. And they have not come out since and said, yeah, we have ruled out criminality.
Canada in 2024, there were just over 30,000 cases of missing children. The vast majority of those cases involve runaways, or they involve teens. And actually about 90% of those cases are resolved within a 1-week period. But it's really important to remember that of those, for example, 30,000 cases, about 0.1% were cases of like a stranger or parental abduction.
So the statistics are pretty clear there. Of all the cases of missing children, 90% are solved within a week. And of all those cases, 0.1%, that is 1 in 1,000 cases, involves a stranger or parental abduction. Now, when you add in the additional factor of this being in a rural area where the children were allegedly in the backyard, that 0.1% becomes an even smaller infinitesimal amount. Now, I couldn't tell you the exact statistic, but it becomes way smaller than 0.1%. And then, when you factor in that you have 2 children going missing, that makes the percentage even more smaller. Because it is something that generally you're not going to hear about. People do not abduct 2 children. Not very often. And when you have a possibility already of only 0.1% that these missing children have been abducted, you factor in the isolated area, you factor in the backyard, meaning they were not visible from the road, you factor in the fact that it was a school day, so nobody would have known they were there, and you factor in that it was 2 children, not 1, then your chances are pretty much down to 0. It would probably be something like 0.001%. All those factors diminish the possibility of an abduction considerably.
Jim Hoskins is a retired HRP officer and former major crimes staff sergeant. Despite not working the Sullivan case himself or being privy to any information regarding RCMP's ongoing investigation, he can see only 2 remaining possibilities.
What I see from the outside, there's only 2 options here. Criminal involvement, search, they haven't found them yet.
Okay, this guy is bringing a lifetime's worth of expertise from major crimes unit. He was a staff sergeant. That means he was the boss over all the detectives that investigated cases just like this one. This guy well and truly knows what he's talking about. And he's saying either they didn't find them in the woods, or we are talking about criminal involvement. And no, he's not talking about abduction here. Now, we can be 90% certain. Actually, I would be 99% certain those children did not wander off into the woods. Simply based on all the lies, well, not simply, but based on what we've heard from people in terms of observations of the area, but also based on the lies, the contradictions, the changed stories. So that means it's criminal, or it's criminal.
They gave you a clue when they said no abduction. That's a big statement to make at this early in the game.
Again, this guy knows what he's talking about. This is what he did for a career. And I have to agree with him. After 6 days, they were scaling back the search. If they believed the children wandered into the woods, they wouldn't have scaled back the search after only 6 days. And to come out and so strongly say, there is no sign of an abduction, we do not believe there's an abduction, that tells you that they have a definite direction for this case. And that it's not an abduction. And they don't believe the children wandered into the woods.
It's been 24 days since Lily and Jack Sullivan were reported missing from their home in Lansdowne Station. Family members have speculated the children were taken, but police have remained adamant they do not believe the siblings were abducted.
So she's saying 24 days, but the date I had there for the news article was the 28th of May. Either way, it's over 3 weeks that she's talking about here. And the RCMP were pretty certain on what they were saying.
In all his years as a police officer, Hoskins says what strikes him most is the probability of something like this happening.
It's bizarre. If you ask me what was bizarre, I'd say, in this case, 2 with this particular family. 2 are gone.
Again, that goes back to the victim risk assessment that I was talking about a few minutes ago. You're starting with a possibility of 0.1%. That diminishes because of all the things that I pointed out, including the fact that there are 2 children missing. He's not wrong. It is quite rare when you have 2 children missing. The bulk of the time, you can be pretty certain that there is criminal involvement, that someone is responsible directly for doing something that means that the children are not around. And no, I'm not referring to abduction.
Chris, during your tenure as Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, of course, you would have seen similar cases to this. What struck you about that RCMP update yesterday and what they had to say? Was there anything?
Yeah, absolutely there was, Todd. And I saw many searches throughout my career through all ranks across the broad expanse of Ontario. And many of them ended well and many of them didn't. This is a heartbreaker, absolutely. But what struck me the most, I think, is that I left it with a feeling that the RCMP know more than they're telling us. And I get that. You can't tell the public everything. And the detective staff sergeant, I believe, a major crime fellow, said it very well. I just can't tell you certain things right now. Well, if there's certain things you can't tell, then ultimately there's leads they're following up, in my view.
Okay.
Who, when, where, and why is another issue, but they're on to something.
So this time you have a former commissioner. This guy was high up in his position. He knows what he's talking about. And he says, straight out the gate, he says straight away that he got a sense that the RCMP knew more than what they were telling us in that news conference. And what he says makes complete sense. If there's certain things you can't tell, ultimately that means that there's leads that are being followed up. And we heard Staff Sergeant McKinnon say if there was anything that pointed in the direction of an abduction, you bet the public would know about it. So the following up of leads means that, yes, there is an active, ongoing investigation, which we've heard so many times, and this active, ongoing investigation has got nothing to do with an abduction. Like I said, if Daniel's story was true, by now the children would have been returned, Malaya would have been in jail, or at the very least, the public would have been advised that the children had been abducted and that they needed to keep an eye out for them.
We heard they don't think the siblings could be alive. Was that something of a surprising admission?
It was an absolute shock to me, to be honest, because I'm thinking after 5-6 days, there's a good chance they're still alive. The weather hasn't been that bad. I've seen searches where people have been 2 weeks in the bush under horrendous conditions. One man was legally blind and still alive. So you just never give up. So to make that statement also makes me think that they're suspecting something more than a couple of children lost in the bush.
Okay.
Again, he's confirming what I've said and what this other guy said. 6 days is really, really early to be making the call and saying that they don't believe the children are still alive. To be making the call to scale back the search. In terms of children wandering off into the woods, 6 days under normal circumstances, you would still have some hope of finding them alive. This is just basic logic, like common sense.
But obviously, major crime is there. They've had the big gun there, not a constable, detective, and a detachment. And so they're onto something here.
What he's said there is particularly interesting because we heard Sergeant McKinnon say that basically, well, as soon as there is a missing children's case, then major crimes become involved, which is true. And they become involved until they can rule out the possibility of criminal involvement. But what this guy is saying, and like I said, this guy is an expert. He's a former commissioner. And he says they're pulling out the whole detachment, not just a constable detective. So he's basically differentiating here. So basically what we're being told is that sure, major crimes do become involved in a missing persons case, but it would be standard practice to allocate a constable detective to the case, as opposed to the entire whole damn unit. But not only that, if you go back and you look at that big news conference, you can see that the big muckety-muck, the big boss, was there, standing right behind Sergeant McKinnon when he was doing his bit of speaking. So yes, that does say a lot about this particular case.
On that point, the stepfather has told us he suspects they might have been abducted. Does that trigger anything at the police level? How do they react to a statement like that?
Well, yeah, they'd be on it like, absolutely, because why do you think that? Who do you think did it? Who had a reason to do it? What makes you say that? Because at that point, as a father or stepfather or mother, you'd be thinking, oh my God, we have to find them. Where are they? Not suddenly out of the blue, well, I think somebody abducted them. I mean, that's kind of a bizarre statement.
So I'd like to hear some logical answers to those questions from Daniel. Why do you think that? Who do you think did it? Not just inferring, but actually saying outright. Who had a reason to do it? And what makes you say that? Now, I'm sure that investigators would have asked those sorts of questions. And if Daniel or Malaya gave them anything solid to go on, they would follow up on it, in which case they would not now be saying there is no sign of an abduction. And he makes that very, very good point, which I think just about every creator who has covered any cases before this has said. Why aren't they saying we have to find them? Where are they? Why aren't they saying, what if they've called the search off after 6 days and the children are still in the woods? Did you hear Malaya or Daniel come out and say, no? What if they're still alive somewhere and we're running out of time? No, Daniel's comment was, yeah, the searchers are getting a bit tired. So, it's understandable. They put in a lot of hours. Like, screw that. My kid's missing. My kid's wandered off into the woods. It's only been 6 days. They could be alive and you're calling off the search. I don't care if the searchers are tired. Call in another search team. But we never heard that said, did we? Now, I'm not saying that this remotely compares to a child being missing. But I want to share a little bit of a story from when my big dog Taka was about 1 year old. She was a rescue dog. I got her a little bit before her first birthday. And back then I lived on rural property. And then a few weeks after I had adopted her, one evening I came home from work and she'd actually gotten outside. She'd let herself outside and then there was no sign of her. Anyway, I searched the entire area till well after dark. I was calling Taka, I was driving around, I was walking around. I posted on several Facebook community groups asking for help. As it turned out, I used to have a neighbour who was a bit of a schizoid. Something was not right in her head. And when Taka had let herself out, my neighbour had come over, taken Taka, locked her up in a shed at her place, then called the council ranger to pick Taka up. And then the same woman posted on the community group where I had posted that my dog was missing, oh, look at that dog, she looks so sad. And I must admit, in the photo she did look sad because it was the photo I took the day that I brought her home. And she did have that lost, sad look on her face. So the woman had posted on a Facebook page about my missing dog, knowing full well that she was the one who had taken my dog, called the ranger and had the ranger pick Taka up. Now that ended up fine. The ranger was headed out my way and he dropped Taka off on Monday when he was at work. He actually dropped her off at my workplace. So she got to spend the day at my workplace, which she thought was great. So about a fortnight later, I was at home. I had just come inside and Taka was dragging her heels a bit. So I left the back door open for her so she could come in when she was ready. And I heard the neighbour drive past along the boundary fence on her four-wheeler. And she slowed down, which I was just like, well, that's normal because she basically used to stalk me. She would drive really, really slowly along the boundary fence of my property. And I used to make sure that if I heard the four-wheeler, I was nowhere in sight because I didn't want to have any encounter with her over any ridiculous petty thing. But a little while later, I suddenly realised that Taka hadn't come inside. I went outside and I called her, I couldn't see her. And my first thought was, did this neighbour take her? I went over to her property and I confronted her and I said, I'm looking for my dog. Do you have her? Because she went missing straight after you went past my property. She claimed no. And I was pretty certain that she was lying to me. But I didn't just give up and go, okay, well, I'll just wait and I'll call the ranger tomorrow when he's on shift, I went searching again, even though I was pretty certain that this crazy woman had taken my dog. As it turned out, she waited till I left, she rang the ranger, got him to come and collect Taka, and Taka spent the weekend at his house because he said she was too sweet to be locked up in the pound. He then brought her to my workplace on the following Monday. But the point is, even though I was pretty damn certain that that's what was going on, that she'd taken Taka and she had her hidden somewhere, I still searched. Because you just never know. And yet Daniel and Janie and all these people were claiming, yeah, definitely an abduction. And they're like, yeah, so there's no chance that they were in the woods. You would hold on to every hope. You're not going to rule out any possibility unless there is something that can prove to you 100% that that is not the possibility. So yes, the lack of concern over finding Lily and Jack, the lack of questions over where are they, that is a huge red flag. Because even if there was a part of you that suspected that maybe they'd been abducted, you're not going to put all your eggs in one basket. No innocent parent does that. Okay, so now it's time to address Daniel's claim of essentially, well, no, the reason that they're saying there's no sign of an abduction is because an abduction is basically when someone who is not known to the children takes the children. So, as you might have guessed from the clips that I've been using, I've been collecting all the early news stories. And I came across this particular clip, which is the reason for making this video in the first place.
According to Nova Scotia's recently updated policing standards, abduction is defined as when a person under 18 years of age or a vulnerable person is taken without the permission of their legal guardian.
Well, that's a pretty clear definition. And that's what I've been saying all along. That's what Justin's been saying all along. I have no doubt that had I not missed a few of Daphne's live streams, that's probably what Daphne is saying and has been saying all along. An abduction is if someone who is under the age of 18 or is a vulnerable person, as in, someone with a disability that needs special care, if they are taken without the permission of their legal guardian. Now, Jack and Lily, their legal guardian would be Malaya. She was not married to Daniel. He didn't adopt the children. So she is their one and only legal guardian. If Daniel is claiming that the children, they weren't abducted because it wasn't an abduction, but they were taken by someone, what he is doing is outright accusing Malaya. And when you consider the implications of what he's saying here, he's essentially accusing Malaya of traffic kind of things. Now, let's get real. First of all, we know that Malaya was not responsible for handing these children over to somebody and that person taking the children and hiding them away. That allegation was made by Dingbat 6 weeks into the investigation. As I said earlier, if there's any truth to that, the RCMP would have been well and truly all over it. We would have heard about it. There would have been arrests. And the children either would have been recovered or there would be an Amber Alert out. None of those things happened. I'm also pretty certain that Daniel doesn't want to be publicly accusing Malaya in this way. So he's actually treading a very, very fine line making this accusation. Because if he's saying, yes, it's not an actual abduction, but they were taken, what he is accusing Malaya of is basically her giving someone permission to take her children. That is a traffic situation. Because we know that she doesn't have the children herself. So Daniel, because I'm pretty certain that CPS would be interested, I'm pretty certain that Malaya's lawyer would be interested, I'm pretty certain that Malaya's family would be interested. Are you going to continue to push this narrative that, no, it wasn't an abduction because it was someone that Malaya gave permission to take her children? Because, jeez, that's not going to look good for you next time you have to go to CPS. That's not going to look good for you when you are trying to get more access to your daughter, or when you're trying to get access to your two older children. It's going to go against you, because that's a pretty serious allegation to be making. And of course, when you look at the logical side of it also, Daniel made sure that Malaya was completely isolated from most friends and family. We've heard by his own admission that he kept tabs on where Malaya was because he had a tracking app with her phone. If that's the case, then we can be pretty certain also that he kept track of all her communication. So, seriously, how would she even organise to send her children to go play in traffic without Daniel knowing? Without him being able to point a finger directly at whoever this individual was. So if Daniel is so certain the children did not wander off into the woods, if he's so certain that, well, it was an abduction, but it wasn't like an abduction in the proper term, it was Malaya organising for someone to take her children and hide them, which essentially is traffic stuff. And yeah, I have to say it that way because of YouTube. Well, Daniel, if you truly believe that, please come out and say it outright. I'm sure Malaya would be quite keen to hear that from you. But if we are completely ruling out the possibility of the children having wandered off into the woods, as you say, if we are ruling out stranger abduction and saying that, well, no, it wasn't technically an abduction because Malaya gave the children to someone. So you're saying the only possibilities here are that the children were given to someone by their mother, or something happened to the children on the property and they are no longer alive. I think we can be pretty certain here what the real scenario is. So I hope that has clarified things for people. Like I said, if it was some sort of traffic arrangement, the RCMP would be on. They would be all over it. We would know about it. Malaya would be arrested. The children would have been returned. So you're ruling out abduction. You're ruling out their mother having sent them to play in the traffic. You're ruling out them heading off into the woods. That only leaves one possibility. The same possibility that many of us have been saying from day one. Ever since seeing that first interview with Daniel Martel and realising how much he was lying, seeing how much he was masking, realising the contradictions that were happening between him and Malaya. And then, of course, Janie came on the scene. She didn't help things out for him at all. It's not the case of an abduction. It's not the case of Malaya giving someone permission to take her children. And it's not a situation of them wandering off into the woods. Daniel, you're a pretty good mathematician. You do the math. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. Help me get this video out there into the algorithm. I have subscribers telling me that they're not necessarily always seeing my videos pop up. So you can help people to be able to see my videos by hitting that like button. You can also help me out by leaving a comment below. So thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.